Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steps podcast. I'm Lou, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast. This is a space where we share our experiences and reflections of entering into the Steps process. Steps, if you don't know, is a 12-week journey towards freedom, which is based on the well-known 12-step process, and this one is centered on the Christian faith. We often assume that 12-step programs are only for people with obvious addictions such as drugs and alcohol, but here we reveal how using these 12 steps can bring about profound hope and change at a personal level, no matter what addiction, behaviour or thought pattern is holding us back. Every episode, we share and reflect on the raw and unfiltered personal journeys of three participants, Jamie, Lars and me, Lou. We share how we began, grew and are still very much growing in this journey towards inner peace and freedom. So welcome back. We're looking at step 4 today, and this is the next part of the process where we are starting to look at making peace with ourselves. And step 4 says, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, which is a bit of a tough one, isn't it? So, Jamie, how did you find working on step 4?
Well, as you know, I was working on over-responsibility, and people who struggle with over-responsibility love fearless inventories because it gives an opportunity to create and explore and introspect and find all the kind of problems with themselves. And of course, that's not really what we're talking about here, is it? When we're talking about a fearless moral inventory, we're not talking about a kind of self-pity fest of find everything that's wrong and I'm the center of the universe and I'm to blame for everything. So yeah, there was a little leap in my heart. Wow, I get to legally judge myself. But yeah, this is not what it's about. And I guess I found it when I took it that kind of approach, it's really kind of exhausting, but that's not the same as a kind of honest looking. And it's not the same as saying, say, to God or higher power, you search me, you tell me the truth, you show me. Because when I do it for myself, the list is exhaustive and it goes on forever. But I'm looking for someone else to show me and point out and reveal. And when I did that, yeah, it's a totally different experience.
So it sounded like you were really involving God in the process of doing your inventory rather than doing it kind of according to what your mind was telling you.
Well, yeah, if I was led by my mind, yeah, I'm responsible for pretty much everything. But what really helped me was, I believe one of the coaches on Steps said, you're not focusing on your thoughts. You're not focusing on your thoughts. You're actually focusing on things that were actually done, things you actually said, concrete things, clear, specific actions, behavior, objective, things where I could say, I did this, and someone else could say, actually, yes, you did. You did do that. And that was so helpful, getting me out of a mindset of overthinking, over responsibility, to saying, okay, is this objective? Did it actually have some lived out reality in the real world, not just in my over responsibility world?
Which kind of reduces it then. It's not so expansive, everything you can write down. Lars, how did you find coming into step 4?
Well, as you may recall, I was working on Pride the first years when I was working on in the steps process, and probably this was the hardest steps of them all. I found it really tough because my pattern had been to avoid facing my own responsibility. So Pride did place me in the center of the universe, but it didn't allow me to be responsible when things went wrong. It was always the responsibility of someone else. I was angry with myself, but it wasn't a concrete anger. So it was never like I'm angry with myself because of. So there was a lot of anger there, but it was concrete when it came to others, the world, even God, for not really giving me the kind of center stage that I thought I deserved. I mean, that is the crazy mind of pride at work. So for me to look into what is my responsibility was terrifying. At the same time, I was really motivated because of my journey through the first 3 steps. And I kind of knew I just have to go through this. There is no turning back. I really had seen the ugly face of what I was dealing with and how much it had damaged my relationship to myself and others and even to God. So that was a strong force within me, pushing me into this territory, which did feel terrifying. And I was crying myself through step 4, really. I did some discoveries that I had never seen before about how this truly had damaged. And also just facing that in terms of, in particular, my relationship with my children, that some of it was just lost. So I knew I could change. So at least I hoped that it would be better from this point, but there was also a sense of deep loss that these first number of years, I will never get them back. I can't really turn back the time and then do it over again. And part of me actually wanted to do that when I was in step 4. I was like, oh, I was so sad that I hadn't actually met this process before in my life. And I had this thought, oh, if I could only rewind and then do things differently. So that was what was going on in me.
Do you know what it made me think? And that is, like, as a facilitator, kind of seeing the number of people who drop out at steps 3, 4, not like that loads drop out, but often if they are going to drop out, it is at that point. And I think it highlights the fact that it is so hard getting to this point, because becoming face to face with your kind of the part we've played in our dysfunction is really hard, and it's very humbling, isn't it? Which is what you were saying. And I definitely found when I got to step 4 again, I found it really hard. I think I was also sobbing my way through. And I resonate with what you said, Jamie, about kind of over responsibility. And I remember really having to fight with the urge to blame myself for everything and to use it as another opportunity to beat myself over the head for all the things that I've done wrong. And my facilitator said to me to put myself on the list so I can acknowledge the harm that I've done to myself through being so harsh on myself. And I found that really helpful, but also helpful to see how I'd played the part of a victim. So I was working on fear of rejection, and I think I had blamed other people for the demands that they put on me and got really angry with them when they would ask too much of me, as if they should know. And then I would need to say yes. And so there was a big part of me that felt really kind of justified in my victim state, and having to kind of come face to face with that was really humbling. And I think it really challenged me on who is the God that I am opening up to with all of this stuff. And it really also challenged my view of who God is. And I think I know that I'd carried this view that he was there waiting to tell me off, really punitive. And as I went through the process, realizing actually that's not the God that I was coming to. And actually the God I was coming to was full of sorrow for the way that I'd been so hard on myself, and is full of mercy and comfort and forgiveness. And that made the process a lot easier for me. Jamie, does that resonate with any of you, with any of your experience, or what kind of emotions were you experiencing at that point?
I think definitely one of the issues about the image of God as being trustworthy as a leader, as a guide, as someone you could point out and show, because I think driving some of the over responsibility was, can I really trust this person to really point out what's really going on? Or do I want to rely on my mechanisms of introspection, of judging stuff, of working it out? So that was a huge part of, could I relax at step 4, trusting there's a person who really knows me, really sees me, really loves me, and is able to communicate in a way that I can hear clearly? Or do I just want to get back onto the hamster wheel of, I do that for myself?
Yeah.
I definitely also identify with what both of you say. I remember I think this was in year 2 or 3 of my process, where I was still kind of struggling a lot with getting into the peace with myself part of the process, which we are now entering into, as you said, Lou. And part of it was definitely my battle with God's role in what was going on in my life. So I had this inner image of, here was I standing with all of this emotional pain, with all of these disturbing thoughts, really battling in life. And God was kind of over there somewhere, so he was there. But I literally had an image of him standing with his back towards me and simply looking in the other direction. So that was my image. So it's like, God is there, I believe that, but he's not looking at me. I'm alone with this. And there was one point I remember on a walk in a forest somewhere in Sweden, actually, where this image really was vivid to me. But then my thought kind of went in another direction, and I realized one of the images in the Bible is the image of a body. And in a way, God is described as the head of the body, so where the central nervous system is. And I'm not good at biology, but I know a little bit because my wife is a nurse. So I kind of realized that if anything feels what is really going on in the body, it's the central nervous system. It's kind of the commando center of the whole thing. That's God. So suddenly I realized, whatever I feel, he feels it even more. Whatever I go through, he goes through as well. So he's not over there looking the other way. He is in the pain as well. And before any of the things that I was battling with had solved themselves, I experienced a huge comfort in that image. And in a way, to me, that became the transportation from peace with God to starting the journey of finding peace with myself.
It's such a massive thing, isn't it, of our view and perception of God and how that impacts us, and it also impacts us through the process. I totally identify with what you said. Jamie, how have you worked through your image of God in this process?
I think part of the transformation through the process was being open to the fact that the way God saw things and the root of things would be very often completely different to the way that I saw them. So I might have an image of myself as, oh, you just want to be amazing. Your motivation's all awful, and you want to be this hero. And I've even sort of reflected on that in the sessions. I just want to be a hero. I need to go smaller. And God's perspective would be, you're hiding. I'm thinking his perspective was completely different to my perspective, to say, actually, you needlessly apologize so you make yourself small. You hide your opinion so that you don't want to make waves. You're hiding. I've actually called you to step out of the shadows, which I thought, wow, that was very different to the perspective that I had. And I did find that so often the thing that God would say at step 4 would be surprising, so and go against what I naturally would conclude. So I remember at one time, step 4, suddenly hearing this phrase, "You made a vow 17 years ago that was wrong." And since then, the vow was, I won't say what I need, I'll be strong, I won't be weak, I'll be sacrificial. And I'm thinking, those are all good virtues. And he put his finger on it, even to the point of saying, you've been overly sacrificial financially because of a wrong vow. I'm thinking, doesn't God need my money? You know, he's touching things that are actually good. It's good to give, but he's saying actually at the root of the giving is a vow. At the root of excessive giving is a vow you made 17 years ago. I'm touching that. And I thought, I didn't even know it existed. Yeah, so there were really surprising moments when in step 4, I say, will you shine a light? Will you show me? Will you point out specific things? And the other thing I would say is whenever I've heard a specific truth from God, it's never been crushing and it's never been burdensome, and it's been challenging and difficult and required courage, but there's there's liberty inside the light that shines and shows. It comes kind of with both precision and with power, precision and with an enablement and a capacity.
I've been really surprised how when I've done the inventory so many times, I've sat there and I did the candle exercise, and which represents like God's light, and I sat there and things would come to mind that I just hadn't thought of and wouldn't have thought of on my own if I'd done it without inviting God in. And it reminded me when you were talking, Jamie, about kind of when you're hearing God and it brings liberty, and there's so many things that kind of clues and insights into my behaviors that only came when I sat and prayed and invited God into that place. And I agree, it felt painful, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a relief to write it on paper. Lars, how did you find writing your inventory?
Well, I did find it painful, and like you expressed this, it's really deep stuff going on. Typically, when we are around step 4, I definitely felt that. So it a bit of a sense of being at the core of your essence, at the core of your being, really. And interestingly, of course, the three of us, we talk about very freely about God. But in my experience, when I sit in groups, I mean, sometimes you or almost very often you sit with people who have no faith or who are exploring faith. We even have Muslims on the courses and so on. We have people who hate church and who would say out loud, if God is there, I hate him too. So I've kind of seen quite a lot of versions of it. But interestingly, I have found that when we are around this phase of the step journey, we might phrase it differently. Some would talk more about destiny or life or things like that, but it's kind of the same experience, really. I remember sitting with one person who was a colleague of my wife, and she was kind of reflecting about she wouldn't call herself a Christian, and she was reflecting on this image of God, and And she said to me, I can hear you're really struggling with this, which I found interesting. So now the one without at least a convinced image of God is asking me questions about this. And then she said, if God really is there, I imagine. And then she gave the most beautiful, lovely description of God that I had heard in a long time. And I just found that so fascinating. And reflecting on it, I was kind of stunned with the beauty of what is in us human beings and how much we have in common, even though we come from very different spiritual backgrounds. So you could say even the three of us, though we are professing Christians, we still have different spiritual backgrounds and stories and so on. But there's a strong, big common denominator in all of this, which is lovely because, I mean, the temptation, at least I found, was I am worse than anyone else. I am and of course, a pride person always wants to be number one. But now I was kind of aiming at being number one and being the worst. So I was really like, and felt a bit alone in it. So there's a healing in realizing in the process, being with others, no matter where we come from, there's something common in this experience.
Which is a good reminder of the power of doing it in a community, because there is the temptation to feel very alone in it, which is definitely what I felt. And I just being in a group and hearing other people share their reflections immediately made me feel like I'm not the worst person around, or, or even kind of we're all struggling and we all have our stuff. Jamie, what encouragement would you give to someone who's at step 4 and struggling?
Well, I would say don't forget, again, step 1 and step 2. That, so say for myself, I'm suddenly realizing that this over responsibility has been partially an excuse to hide. So at step 4, I'm faced with a truth. Now, to come out of hiding and to be seen and to stop overly apologizing is going to need real shift and transformation. So I need to come back to powerlessness. I need to come back to the reality that I can't manage this myself, and I need to come back to the one who can help me. And I need to surrender it and say, actually, I don't want to hide anymore. So I'd really encourage people to not forget the process, to look back as well. There's lots to come. There's some really amazing tools and things that are going to come in the next steps, but to look back. And I would say to dare to believe the assessment of God, to dare to believe what he says about you in these steps and how he sees you is real and true. And in experiencing his love and the fact he sees and knows you is a huge encouragement as well. And it gives a lot of permission and freedom to dream. And I would just say, just trust the deep work of God. This is going to lead to lots of new experiences, lots of new permission, lots of new dreams, and lots of new adventures that are to come. And the process is going to unlock those and unpack those for people as they carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that when I did step 4, I just felt so overwhelmed at times, and overwhelmed by the mess that I was in, because doing the inventory made me more and more aware of things that I hadn't been aware of before necessarily, or things that I'd just kind of buried. And I said earlier about how it really challenged my view of God, and I think my encouragement would be to I think one thing that I found really helpful is I read Psalm 139 about who God has made me to be, and I read it for myself, whereas before I would read it as if it applied to everyone but not really me. But I read it slowly and I was like, this is for me, he means this about me. And so I think my encouragement would be to do that, to kind of be still and to allow God to do some inner kind of healing work of how he did it for me, for how I saw God and related to God. I really felt like there was some kind of restoration at that point. but kind of having an emotional response to step 4 is highly normal. And I really related to what you said, Jamie, about reminding ourselves, it's okay to be back at step 1 and feeling comfortable in our powerlessness and in our doubts, because that is it's just a normal part of the process. Lars, how about you? What would your encouragement be?
Well, I would probably say don't be afraid of getting it wrong. Don't be afraid of not achieving what you feel like you need to achieve, but rather lean back, trust the process, and do what you can do. If you only have 20 minutes for the exercise, well, that's what you have. And then trust that that will be good enough for this time. Maybe you will have more time next time. So some of that attitude to lean back and not leaning in on our own strength or resources or competence to do this process, but rather leaning back into the first line of the serenity prayer, where we ask for serenity to accept the things we cannot change. So there's a lot of leaning into God in that sentence, and I found we really need to lean strongly on that first sentence of the serenity prayer when we are around step 4 and 5 even. So that's what I would like to say. And don't be afraid. There are thousands and thousands, even millions, who've been going through this process before you, and there are so many stories about how people have been helped. So just be joyful that you're here and trust that that is enough.
That's a good reminder. I've taken a lot of encouragement from that, so thank you. So step 5 we're going to talk about next time, and that is we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So this is still in the part of the process where we're making peace with ourselves. It's confession. It's quite a significant one, I think, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it with you guys next time. Jamie, why don't you share the serenity prayer as we finish?
Yeah, absolutely. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.